You're listening to the Racer to Racer podcast presented by Race 92. Race 92 is a vintage-inspired racing apparel brand specializing in celebrating vintage race culture and adapting to motorsports today. Check out race92.com for all your racing merchandise needs. I'm your co-host, Aaron McAtee. Other co-hosts you may have seen walking out of Great Clips with a big old smile on his face. You've probably seen him at a dirt track. He is the one and only Scott Bauer. You were at a dirt track last night.
I was in Hobstadt, Indiana, watching the USAC Midget Week show.
I love it how you always say like you were somewhere, but then you don't say why. Like because obviously you had a family member there racing.
I did. My nephew was around last night, and he made the show. Unfortunately, it was a little controversial how he made the show. He got in the back of Logan Seavey at the end of the semi, got the last transfer spot. Hard racing. It definitely wasn't on purpose, but he did get in the back of him. And unfortunately, in the feature, it dropped the valve, broke the motor. He's going to be out for a while, but he ran good, ran hard. Tough group of cars, as always, when you're talking about the USAC national scene. I did get to say hi to Taylor Reimer and thank her for coming on the show earlier this year. I did not get a chance to talk to Maria Kofer. And again, in the semi, Chris and her got together, and she got spun out. And that one there, she was mad. I could understand why she'd be mad at that one. That he didn't mean to do it, but he did definitely
Who's
get
that,
into
Maria?
her. Yeah. So apologies to you, Maria. But it was a good race. Thomas Mesron won. Buddy Kofoid followed up his first two wins with the second. And Mitchell Moles was third. Hard racing is a good show. Yeah, other than that, that's what I did last night.
Is there anything in racing that's not controversial? That's a question.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, not often anymore. Or maybe never. I don't know.
Yeah, it come and goes, I guess. But so the show today is we revisit with David Hobbs, and then we filmed this I think a couple months ago. Obviously we had him on, I think pretty early on in the podcast. It was last summer, I believe. And he was just a great guy. We know we wanted to have him back on because if you listen to the first episode, he had to go, and we talked about the majority of his racing career, but he had a big career outside of his racing career. Obviously the broadcast, really a broadcasting legend, and he was kind of giving me a hard time because I called him a broadcasting legend or whatever. And just a great guy, and we definitely always enjoy talking to him.
Yeah, I really enjoyed David's interviews. Obviously, he can tell you, about almost every facet of the sport because he's been a part of almost every facet of the sport.
No kidding.
For a pretty good time period. So he has definitely seen the sport evolve and change, and yeah, it's just I just enjoy listening to guys like that talk about their opinions and their times and what they how they perceive things and where they think things are at. So I really enjoy talking to David.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so for next week, we're going to release Sebastian Severde, obviously also a veteran of the Indianapolis 500. Great guy, still an active driver, still actively looking for IndyCar ride. And I know he had a couple things he was working for in May, and I know he does some like driving coaching and other things like that. But great guy, very good discussion for sure. And he's someone who was super young when he got into IndyCar. And it just seemed like he's been around so long, and he's still super young. It's just because he was like 18 or 19 when he first drove, I think, in the 500.
Yeah, I think that's one of those deals where you come along so young and you don't, by the time you're starting to develop, sometimes those deals run out and you don't get to your full potential. I've seen a lot at the lower levels of the sport. But you see it at the higher level too, where somebody will come along and they've got promise, they got talent, they show flashes of brilliance, and right when they start getting steady at it and really start putting it together, it just kind of fizzles out. And I'm not saying that um, that's exactly what happened to him, but I mean, we have seen it happen to others, and um, I hope he gets another chance. Um, now that he's older, a little more
Mhm.
mature, I sure hope something comes together for him.
Yeah, no, and I think it definitely will. I mean, it seems like he's doing other racing as well, so a lot of opportunities in
Yeah,
sports car and stuff like that. But
yeah,
and then
I meant more along the lines of IndyCar, like the
right,
500.
absolutely,
Yeah,
yeah.
so
And so this past weekend was the Grand Prix at Detroit Belle Isle for IndyCar. Willpower, got the win there. And kind of ironic, or I'm definitely happy for him because remember last year is where he had that little the problem with the ECU overheating or whatever, and he talked about that when we had him on the show last year. So definitely
well,
good,
so if you go back and listen to it, I believe what he talks about is that the shutdown procedure wasn't exactly,
right?
and because they had changed something in his and was not aware that he would had to make that
And he
change.
was the only car that they did it to.
Right. And he was the only car that they had changed that to. So if anybody wants to go back and listen to him talk about that, and
Yeah,
that's a great interview because he really gets into talking a little bit more about his mindsets and his qualifying, how he approaches qualifying. As what we all know, he's one of the greatest qualifiers of all time in IndyCar. So I really enjoyed it. It's really been interesting to almost kind of see him. This year has almost been an evolution of what we sort of talked about in the show, um, talking, somewhat about mindset and how you approach it and that sort of thing. Because I think he had always been known as a real fiery guy. Like he could really get him lit up pretty good if you wanted to. And of course, there's the famous video of the double birds and all that. But that's not been his approach this year, and he's been taking it as it comes, maximizing his finishes, and he finally got his win this weekend. So congratulations to him. Sad it's the final race of Belle Isle for the foreseeable future as they move that race back to downtown Detroit as it was years and years and years and years ago. So hopefully that event stays successful. Um, but boy, Belle Isle, you listen to the drivers talk, and you all hear them complain about it for years, how tough it was and how rough it was, and it was just such a demanding track. And now that it's going away, all the drivers are like, well, I'm going to really miss it because it was a driver's track. And so it's just always funny to listen to the racing people. A lot of times, something they complain about is because it's one of the more challenging things, and it's actually a real challenge that they enjoy. But
yeah,
in their nature, they like to complain a little bit. So, but I sure hope that the new configuration, or the new old configuration, works out. And it's a good show. So,
absolutely. And a couple takeaways I had from Detroit, I think are worth mentioning. First off, Alexander Rossi into the race, that dude was flying.
boy, it sure looks like he's back to his old form. I
And
don't know what.
ironically, the same weekend, literally the same weekend, they announced that he's going to McLaren.
Well, I mean, it is, but then you look. I mean, really, he was great at the speedway
He
during
was
the race.
absolutely.
So I don't know what's changed. Of course, things typically are cyclical. So I mean, your highs are you can't stay high forever, and if you are really putting the effort in, typically you don't stay low forever.
Sure.
And it really looks like that pendulum is starting to swing back for him. Hopefully, he can get another win or two before the season's over. I think everybody enjoys it when Alexander Rossi is at his
Yeah.
best. So hopefully that starts working out where
And
he can
Kyle
keep finishing up front. So
and Kyle Kirkwood, who's taking his right next year. had a pretty good weekend. I know he had a couple bad luck deals, but he's fastest in the practice on Friday, and during the race, I think he was up to third, right?
Yeah, I got to hear it was fading in and out as we were going to Hobstadt, but from what I've seen in the replay, he got up to third. I don't know what happened that dropped him back. I don't remember what happened. Like I said, I've seen the replay, but I don't remember.
Right. So I think next year he's definitely going to be a force to be reckoned with in the Andretti car. He just proved how quick he is. Obviously, in a car that really hasn't done much for a while, and like you said, Detroit's a driver's track, so he was able to kind of show, what he's capable of.
Well, I think it's really interesting that they announced their deal with Andretti, and then all of a sudden, Foyt's cars are really great at a place where Andretti's cars are great, and that's a street course. And
Right.
it sure looks to me, and I realize they use other motors and all of that, but it would not shock me if we found out that possibly Foyt's team was getting some suspension help, which really Andretti is known for, is their great suspensions. And I haven't heard that. It just, as you're playing amateur detective, you start putting two and two together, and
You're
it
good at
sure
doing
kind of
that.
looked that way.
You're good at
Yeah,
doing that. Amateur detecting.
yeah. Sometimes I'm right, and oftentimes I'm wrong.
Absolutely. Well, is there any other racing news?
You mentioned Eldon Rasmussen passing.
Oh yes. I think he made the Indy 500 3 times. And he drove sprint cars.
I will tell you, I have not studied a lot of Eldon's career. I would say that I know him from his IndyCar stuff.
Right.
I really know him from is when I was a little kid, and he had Eldon Rasmussen's what they call those like mini Grand Prix or Long Beach Grand Prix or whatever they called that those go karts that look like Indy cars, and he had one that was right off of 65
The
North.
Manco carts?
I don't know if that's the right name for them. I can't remember exactly what they call those cards.
Well, like the Allen
That
Jr. carts, like those that look like the actual Indy car, those are made by Manco.
no, these were built specific for like a racetrack.
Oh, I gotcha.
So what they did was they did a franchise deal. So you used to find these places all over the country, I believe. Because I know I did it in Ohio one time, and I know there were other places. I can't remember the name of them, but they look like an Indy car, and they were pretty cool. So he had that place. That was later purchased. I don't. I know Mike Hurst ran it. I don't think Mike ever owned it, but then they actually had rental type racing go karts, and then some of the other type of rental carts, and then they would actually hold races there because it was a really nice track. Um, so anyway, I remember him from that. I met him a few times. He's really nice. He was really, I believe, he was a pretty great fabricator and that
Mhm.
sort of thing. So I wish I was more prepared to talk about Eldon,
Yeah.
because I just don't know
Well,
a ton about his career.
yeah, and I know he lived locally here in the Indianapolis area, and I know he spent a lot of time in McGilvery's when Don Kay did his
Okay.
Autosport radio show there, and he was there I think every single week. So very nice guy, and was always around. So yeah, we're definitely very unfortunate to hear about that. But yeah, he's definitely a great guy.
Yeah, I hate it. I hate it as these that generation of racer leaves us. It does make me sad.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and in other news, so we talked a little bit about it last week, but we did film some exclusive content with good friend of the show, Mr. Jagger Jones, that we'll be releasing. So there's 2 videos total. We'll be releasing those within the next few weeks. I don't know the exact order yet. So we have one from when he was racing at Indy. That will be at Indianapolis Motor Speedway will be releasing first. And then we did a fun little video racing go-karts, indoor karts at Fast Times Indoor Karting. I think everyone will enjoy. I raced my buddy Jacob, who's part of Race 92, raced as well. Scott was just there as kind of the commentator,
moral support,
an advisor. And yeah, you and him were kind of debriefing a little bit there. Like it was a pretty high tech deal. I mean, we're just sitting there talking. I looked over and he's got GoPro footage up. You got your flashlight out. Like you were messing around, dude.
I think it looked more impressive than it was. We were honestly just looking at lap times and that sort of thing, and just talking about nothing.
Scott's eyes aren't as good as they were back in the day, so he has to have the flashlight.
They're bad. Yeah. They're bad, and I keep pretending they're not bad, and they're not great.
You know, there's. Have you ever heard of have you heard of an eye doctor?
I have heard of them. I have heard. I don't visit them, but I have heard of them.
You probably can't see. Hey, you can't see them, can you?
That's right. I can't see them. I just keep hoping that on one of my birthdays, the numbers switch, and then I go back. So, like my next birthday, I'll be 53. I hope I go back to 35.
Well, I think that's called dyslexia, and you may want to get that checked out as well.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. That's probably something I need to work on too.
So we got that. Last week we recorded an interview with a Indy 500 winner, which was really good interview. Someone that I guess I'm trying to think best way to say it. Like he's someone you don't think is the most talkative or really has the most to say, but it was really good interview.
Yeah, I would not say surprisingly well. I didn't know him very well.
Right, exactly.
So you don't know him, I didn't he was very forthcoming with a lot of things.
He was.
So it was very interesting to speak with him. So yeah, that'll be out here pretty shortly. The name of those go-karts was Malibu Grand Prix. I just remembered it. So
you see, it looks like we got a guy behind the scenes that's talking in your ear, telling you what they are.
Right. It would appear that way. It's just that things come to my mind very slowly these days. So that's how I remembered it.
Man, that's funny. So I'm trying to think what else. So yeah, so we're working on some other interviews. We talked to some people in May, so we're scheduling some really cool people. A couple, if it actually happens, I'll be very excited. I know you will too. So I talked to one today.
Yeah, you definitely got around during the month of May and really put.
I have to give credit. I have to give credit to my dad because he did help with some of it.
Sure,
a lot of it. So special thanks to him.
You talk about the guy behind the scenes. Your dad really is the guy behind the scenes.
Yep, he really is. He does a really good job with it. We definitely appreciate it. He enjoys it as well. So yeah, so hope everyone enjoys the interview with David Hobbs, and stay tuned next week for Sebastian Severde, and stay tuned for the other content we will be releasing. Thanks everyone for watching and listening. If you haven't already, make sure you hit like and subscribe on YouTube, and also follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, anywhere else where podcasts can be found.
I didn't even know Spotify was even a thing.
Spotify, that's a new one.
We might start that. Yeah, everybody, please take care. Thank you so much to everybody who subscribed. Man, I remember I couldn't believe we got to 50, and now we're closing in on 200. And while I know there's a lot of people who think that's nothing, I thank each and every person who listens, and I thank everybody who takes the time to subscribe. And I realize I say these things and it always sounds like I'm leaving the people out who listen, just standard podcast formatting. Thank you so much to you as well. You just do not know how much I appreciate it.
At 200, we're going to have to figure out something. I think you're going to have to do something to 200.
Yeah. Why is it me? It's always got to do things.
Well, I think if we took a vote, I think everyone would vote you. So it's an ominous decision.
This is true. I think you're right. The thing is once people see me do things, they don't want to see me do things. So it's a double-edged sword.
Well, I think there's a couple TikTok videos we've talked about in the past that we're going to have you recreate. So I think people really enjoy those. Those will get us some views.
Yeah, yeah, we'll have to discuss that.
Well, hope everyone enjoys and everyone has a great week.
Thanks, everybody.
Today we were joined by one of our returning guests, racing and broadcasting legend David Hobbs. David, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Really appreciate you coming on. And I know the last time I gave you that intro of legendary broadcasting legend, and I remember you really enjoyed that introduction.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you very much indeed. Yeah. Honored to be on your show.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously we had about an hour interview. I think, man, that was in the summer at this point. And we talked a little bit about how you got into racing. Talked about 24 Hours of Daytona, Indy 500 a little bit. So at what point, and we didn't really touch upon your broadcasting career. At what point how did you get involved in broadcasting, or how did the idea come about?
Well, when I was doing the Formula 5000 championship between 1969 and 1975, when I first arrived here, it was just called the Formula A Championship. Then it turned into Formula 5000. And then RM Cigarettes became the sponsor. And they employed Rod Campbell, PR, to do the advertising and the promotion of the racing series. And of course, Rod Campbell was just a young guy then. But he went on to great things and ran Ford PR for like 40 years and became a big company. But then he was just really starting out. And he picked me and Sam Posey as basically the spokesman for the series because we we were the best gabbers. So he used to take us everywhere. We'd go to every race. Would be at like Sears Point, for instance. We'd go into San Francisco and we'd go to other towns across the bay, Walnut Creek, Los Angeles. We'd do the stations in Los Angeles, and he was a really a tiger. He would just absolutely get us into all the radio shows, all the TV shows, on the sports side of the TV shows, and of course try and get interviews with all the papers, of which in those days there was a lot. And up in Watkins Glen, we'd go to Binghamton, we'd go to Syracuse, we'd go to Ithaca. He really covered it. He did a great job. And Sam and I had a lot of practice at talking about racing. And we were really helped by Rod Campbell enormously. Unfortunately, Rod passed away just last year, so much missed guy, but he was a tremendous help to us. And of course, in those days, racing was just especially road racing. Everybody knew about oval racing, and everybody knew about IndyCar, and but because NASCAR wasn't anything like as big then as it is now. But all those sports guys on all these radio, TV stations, they're all stick and ball. All they could talk about was baseball or football or basketball. So they didn't understand the racing at all. And they certainly didn't know what Formula 5000 was. And when I did the Indy 500 in 1971 for Roger Penske, that changed their attitude to me enormously. I mean, it shouldn't have made the slightest bit of difference, but it did. Suddenly it became, oh wow, okay, so you're a real race driver, so this must be a real race series. So that was, as I say, and that went on for 4 years. And then, so I won the championship in 1971, and I was runner-up in 1969, and I was third in 1970, and it was a pretty successful time for me over here because I only just really arrived in America. And then I knew Ken Squire, who was the play-by-play on a lot of CBS sports programming, including any racing that they did. And he asked me his color commentator was going to be Graham Hill, the English world champion, Formula One world champion. And of course, right before he was going to be on, Graham Hill went and got himself killed in his plane crash, doing all the wrong things, which is what usually happens with pilots, told not to land because it was very foggy at the airport he wanted to go to. So, no, I know the airport. I've landed here hundreds of times. Crashed, killed himself and 5 other people. So Ken said to me, why don't you have a go at trying to, be our play-by-play guy? So I went down to CBS on 57th Street in New York and was interviewed by the vice president of sport. Well, my interview was a disaster. It was just one of those awful situations. The deeper I got in, I mean, this guy didn't know anything about racing at all. I said, well, I was Formula 5000 champion. What's Formula 5000? I said, it was like Formula One, but it's got a stock block Chevrolet engine. And he didn't know anything about anything. And it was quite clear after about half an hour, 40 minutes, that as I left the office, it was a handshake and well, don't call us, we'll call you. Quite obvious. Well, that was in October. Well, as luck would have it, this is October 75. As luck would have it, in January 76, I had a deal with Coca-Cola, not a very big deal, which a friend of mine, Michael Bailey, put together. And it included putting Coca-Cola on the BMW 3-liter CSLs for the Daytona 24-hour race. And I would drive with Benny Parsons. But I would drive Benny Parsons' backup car in the 500, also with Coca-Cola sponsorship. So I went over to do the 24-hour, which was a disaster because we got water in the fuel. Everybody got water in the fuel, but we had a hell of a job getting rid of ours. And so I did the 24-hour. Well, in those days, the 24-hour race was only like 2 weeks before the 500. It wasn't like it is today, where it's a month. And so obviously, rather than fly back to England, I stayed in Daytona. And around comes the Daytona 500 week, and Ken Squire used to have a radio show from the Hawaiian Inn on the beach. I don't know whether you've ever been there or seen it, but it's still there, much to my astonishment. Anyway, he used to have this radio show that went out every night, I don't know, 8 o'clock, something like that. It was an hour long. And he'd have 4 or 5 guests. Well, anyway, on the Wednesday night before the 500, he had me on, and all the IndyCar drivers, all the Daytona drivers were there. Richard Petty, Cale Yara, Benny Parsons, a whole bunch of them were there. And Ken, for years, had been pestering CBS. He said, you've got to do IndyCar. That's where it's at. That's really where racing's going. You got to do the NASCAR. Go do NASCAR. Forget about IndyCar. Forget about all the other stuff. Do NASCAR. Well, of course, nobody in New York had ever heard of NASCAR. So eventually, the same guy that interviewed me, Clarence Cross, came down to watch the Daytona 500 and get a feel for it and see what it was all about. Well, he just happened to arrive that day. And he and his wife, he brought his wife with him because it was February, and obviously February in New York is not great, so they thought they'd have a few days off. So he came down, and he was in the audience that night when I was on with Ken. And we had a very, very funny interview. It was extremely successful. I mean, the place was rolling about and laughed, and everybody was having a fantastic time. And I was only on for about 10 minutes. And it was really, really successful. It could not have been better. And as I went back to sit at the table, because I was with them, with Ken and this bloke, Clarence Cross, and his wife. And as I went back to the table, the wife said, you shouldn't be driving race cars. She said, you should be on stage. So I said, well, don't tell me, tell your husband. So anyway, he said, oh, well, I see a different side of you now. And blah, 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 and all that. So I kept pressing them. all through 76. And then eventually they asked me to do the Pocono 500 IndyCar race with Ken. They had wanted another IndyCar driver to do it, but he decided to do the race. So in the end, I did that with Ken. So that would be like August or thereabouts, 76. And I never missed a race with CBS then for the next till I left there at the end of 1995. Oh, wow. So that's how I got into broadcasting, and obviously it worked out pretty well because the first race, they flew me over from England first class, and they gave us $75 a day per diem in those days. You can't get $75 a day now. So I came over, did the race, and of course I rang them. I got back to England. I rang them up and said, "Well, how was that? Was it any good?" You know, "Oh yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. Well, what you know, any more? Oh, we don't know yet. Well, we'll call it." Well, about less than a week later, they asked me if I'd like to do the Trenton IndyCar race from the old Trenton track. So off I traveled to America and do Trenton, and then, as I say, I never missed a race for the next 20 odd years, nearly 20 years. And my first Formula One race was with them. We did the Watkins Glen Formula One race in 1976. And then we did a few more. In the following years, we did a few more. We did the French Grand Prix a couple of times. We did the British Grand Prix from Brands Hatch and the British Grand Prix from Silverstone on different years. We did the US Grand Prix, and then we started going to Long Beach, and we did the US Grand Prix from Long Beach every year. So I did quite a bit of Formula One stuff with CBS, and then they cut back. And we used to do a lot of those. We did a lot of NASCAR between 70. And of course, the Daytona 500 was. So eventually, after Clarence Cross had been down there and watched the Daytona 500 in 76, then they decided they were going to do the Daytona 500. And 1979 rolls around, and they're going to do the very first live broadcast of a NASCAR race. Between 76 and 79, Ken and I did a lot of NASCAR races, but they were all voiceovers in the middle of the night, which were incredibly difficult to do because the race is cut. So it's an hour, it's a 2-hour race, so they cut it to like an hour show, minus, of course, 15 minutes for commercials. So every segment is already cut, and you have to commentate exactly to that segment. You can't just go over by a couple of seconds, or you can't start a couple of seconds early. So it's not easy. But of course, it was still regarded as very much second string stuff. And we did all these voiceovers always in the middle of the night when the studios were empty and nobody else was using them. Nobody serious was using the studios, so they let us in. And we did a lot in New York, and we used to go to a place out just north of Chicago. It was a recording studio just right by a big US base, Air Force base, just north of Chicago. I mean, we'd drag in there at about 10 o'clock, get a cab, go out to this bloody, do the show. To do those hour shows would take at least 2 hours by the time I've got to do that again, Oh, I got the number wrong, Christ, So it was a dismal business. And then finally 79 came, and they did the 500, and I was in the booth with Ken, and in the pits was Mike Joy and Larry Newber. And of course, the 1979 500 was, according to Dale Earnhardt Jr., that's his favorite race ever.
Right.
And he said, you were my favorite commentator. He said, because at the end, Donnie Allison and Cale Yarborough had been nose to tail for like 20 laps or 15 laps, and everybody else was miles behind. So as they come into turn 3 on the final lap, I can't remember who was leading, but he goes low to block, and the other one comes down, and then the next thing is They run into each other and all hell breaks loose. They spin up the track, hit the wall, come down to the apron, spin down to the apron, get out the car and start fighting. Meanwhile, Richard Petty, who's a very distant third, wins his 900th Daytona 500 or whatever that it was, which of course was incredibly popular with the crowd. Meanwhile, these two guys are still fighting down at turn 3. And Bobby Allison, who came second or third, I can't remember, he goes rather slowing down that, so he gets around there. So he jumps out of his car to help his brother. So there's all three of them flailing away down there. And of course, Cale Yarborough had the most incredible comb over. And when he took his helmet off and started to fight, his hair was about out here somewhere, waving about, and they're hitting each other with the helmets. And oh my God. And of course, Ken's just going ecstatic in the booth, and we're all shouting and screaming. And of course, Richard Petty winning, the whole thing was just a dream come true for a broadcast, especially a maiden broadcast. And it also turned out that we were incredibly fortunate that there was a massive snowstorm blanketed a lot of the Midwest and the Northeast. So everybody was at home, couldn't go anywhere. So instead of they thought they might get 1 million people or 500,000 or 600,000 tuning in. Instead of which, they had like 6 million people saw it. So of course, all the suits up in New York were absolutely ecstatic, couldn't believe it. So then we did. Then for a few years, we did the Daytona 500. We did the Charlotte World 600, which was on the same day as the Indy 500. We did Michigan, and we did Talladega 500. And we went to a couple of other places for a little bit, but then they basically cut it all down to just those 4 races. So we did that for years. And so then in 1987, we were only doing, like, as I say, Daytona, Michigan, and Talladega. I think we dropped. I don't think we did the World 600 anymore. So we just had 3 races. So I rang ESPN, and Terry Lingner answered the phone, and Terry Lingner's still runs a production team today. Well, right down there in Indiana, we're Indianapolis, on Main Street. And he said, what are you ringing us for? He said, you're a star on the network. And I said, well, I may be a network guy, but on the other hand, I said, we only do a few races. I want to do more races, Well, he said, we'd love to have you. And I had already asked CBS if it would be okay, because obviously you can't just dot around from station to station. They of course just said, ESPN, they won't last. That blooming cable, that won't last 5 minutes. That'll be gone. Yeah, go and work with them if you like, but it won't last long because they won't survive. So I went to ESPN, and I started at St. Pete with Bob Varsha doing an IMSA race. So I did IMSA, I did Indy Lights, did IndyCar, a bit of IndyCar. We did Trans Am. And of course, in the second year I was there, Jackie Stewart did the Formula One with John Bisignano. And anyway, Jackie decided he had enough of it. So they asked me if I'd stand in. So I went off with Chris Economaki to Brazil to do the first race of 1988, which was a story in its own. And then he only lasted a year, and Bob Varsha came on board, and then Bob and I did Formula One together for 80, 89, 90, 91, 92. Then at the end of 92, one of the head guys at ESPN took a liking to Derek Daly, and they put Derek Daly in my place. But I still did everything else for ESPN, as I say, Trans Am, Formula Atlantic, IMSA, and then in 1996, Roger Warner who had been the very first president of ESPN, and he was the guy that got them the Formula One through Bernie Eccleston. So he and Bernie were very close. And so I went to work for Speed Vision, and they did everything, airplane racing, motorbike racing, all car racing, rallying. They did the World Rally Championship. They did all sorts of stuff. Anyway, old Roger approached Bernie and poached the Formula One back from Eccleston. So then I worked back on Formula One again. Bob got really badly treated by ESPN because he used to do everything. He did skiing, he did skating, he did track and field, he did all that racing. And for some reason or other, his face didn't fit. So the next thing he comes along. So Bob and I, and of course Steve Matchett joined in 2000. We did Formula One right through to 2012 when ESPN lost it again. I mean, Speed Vision lost it to NBC. And NBC asked me and Steve to go to them. So I did that Formula One right up to 2017 when it went back to ESPN. And they decided to take the feed from Sky in Europe. And so ESPN didn't need any American crew at all. They just take the feed. They just take the feed of the audio as well. And so it cost them very little money. So when I left in 2017, a bit old to start looking around for more work. So I sort of retired.
When did you do the Cars movie?
The Cars movie was unbelievably long ago. It was it 2013 or was it 2012?
You were just in one. You were just in was it Cars 2? You were just in
Cars
one of them,
2.
right? Yeah.
Cars 2, yeah. I got Frank Wilson, who was our boss at Speed Vision. He was all excited one day, coming and say, "Hey," he said, "I've had a call from Pixar Studios. They want to talk to you about doing a film." Oh, okay. So yeah, so they did. They contacted me, and I did. It was very short. It was me and Darrell Waltrip and Brent Musburger, and he became Brent Mustangburger. Darrell Waltrip became Darrell Cartrip, and I came David Hobbs Cap. And I was in an XKE, a green Jaguar XKE. Darrell, of course, was in a Chev. And it was all very, and we were the commentary team on those Formula One, whatever they call them. They didn't call them Formula One, obviously, in the film, but they were basically Formula One cars. And they called it wasn't Monte Carlo, they called it something else. So, I mean, the whole thing only took me about an hour.
Wow.
I flew over to San Francisco and stayed the night, went into the studio in the morning. They showed me all over the Pixar studios, which was fascinating. Met all the artists and the guys and girls. And then they had sent me the script, and it was not very long. And then John Lasseter, who was the boss at Pixar and the main producer and the brains behind the idea, really. I just stood at a microphone with a headset on and read my lines. And he would sit there. He's sitting right in front of me on a chair, just right in front of me, and say, "Well, just do that bit again. Put a little bit more emphasis on, and he's winning or or whatever." So I'd do it again. Okay, it's fine. But as I say, the whole thing only took about half an hour, because I never met any of the other stars. And I'd like to have met, obviously, Michael Caine, who was the star, but of course never saw those guys at all. And I think and I still get royalty checks from that. I mean, not much, like I always work out to be about $120 to $160 a quarter. And of course, they take everything off. I mean, your Medicare, your California state tax, the federal taxes, everything's taken off. But I mean, it's amazing, you know, there's always about 96 cents in there or 77 cents. I often wonder how the hell they work out the 77 cents bit, but anyway. So, and that's, like I say, I think it was a long time ago, a lot longer than I thought. It's about 2012 or 2013. So,
you've never done any other voiceover work?
No, I haven't.
That's crazy. You got such a distinctive voice. I'm really surprised you haven't been asked.
Yeah, well, I kind of thought I might be asked to do a few voiceovers for, especially English products or something like that, you know, because people over here definitely like the English accent. But anyway, no, I haven't done any other voiceover, which is a bit strange.
Yeah, that's a surprise. Yeah, you're talking about the 79 Daytona 500, and like you said, and we touched on it last time you were on here, and like you said, the snowstorm and everybody just being locked into their houses, and such a crazy finish, and you know, is it pretty amazing that something like that happened? I mean, right? I mean, you couldn't script it. You know, it's one of those lightning in a bottle moments that really carried NASCAR for that, you know, for several years after.
Well, in my opinion, it was the greatest thing that ever happened to NASCAR. Yeah. I mean, it put them on the map. And as I say, CBS were not that interested in doing it. Bill France was very against it. He couldn't see that at all. He couldn't see beyond the crowd at Daytona. This might take crowd away from the show. So it wasn't aired in obviously Florida, and I think southern Georgia and Alabama, and they were all blacked out. They didn't get it, and he couldn't see it. But I mean, it absolutely made NASCAR, because suddenly then everybody's knocking down the door to televise NASCAR races. And I mean, the current contract that NBC signed back when I'd been there a year, I think it was 2016 or 2015, that NBC managed to get half the races. And them and Fox cough up $4.5 billion each for 10 years. So you're looking at $9 billion over 10 years. And it's, you know, I mean, money that NASCAR would never dreamt of being able to get. And then, of course, you know, now they do them all. But it used to be that TNT would do races, ESPN did races,
Sure.
Fox did races, NBC had done some apparently in the past, but then they came back. But it's it all comes from that Daytona 500, and part of the success of that Daytona 500 was the fight at the end, Richard Petty winning, and the snowstorm. I mean, as you say, you couldn't script it. And I remember the after race party, we all went to a restaurant in Daytona with the producer, the director. The director was Michael Fishman, who basically was a baseball guy. He was a baseball director. And our first producer was, I've forgotten his name, but he was one of their producers. Then we all went out, and a couple of of course, for the race, a couple of head cheeses came down from New York, and we all went off for a party it was on Route 1. Can't remember what it was. But we're all saying, you know, can you believe that? I mean, what a setup. I mean, how lucky were we that the fight, we didn't know about, I don't think we were aware of the snowstorm then, but, you know, because the next day the overnight ratings come out and everybody just about fell out of the chairs, you know, thinking, God, you know. So it was the best thing that ever happened to, and I've always said that NASCAR should really should have started giving him a pension around about then. of about $500,000 a year, because they could certainly afford it. And it was his push that got him on that show.
So at
yeah, I'm sorry. Ken is somebody that people really don't talk too much about, but boy, he sure had a lot of influence in the sport, especially, like you said, behind the scenes.
Yeah, Ken was very influential. He was a very, very good play-by-play guy. He studied whatever he was going to do, and like him and Bob and Lee Diffie, it's just amazing to me how they jump from sport to sport, because Lee's doing the Olympics at the moment, and everybody says, how the hell does Lee Diffie? He talks about these skaters and these guys on the toboggans and the loos like he known them all his life.
Yeah.
And Ken was like that, and Ken was very good, and of course Ken knew a lot of people, a hell of a lot of people. And he did a fantastic job for NASCAR. And he did a lot of other NASCAR stuff. And of course, Ken was a real racer at heart, because he has that racetrack. What's it, Thunder Road up in Vermont, which he sold now.
Yeah, I didn't know the name of it, but yeah.
He did have that racetrack up there for forever. And the guy that was the general manager of the racetrack, who I can remember his face, I can't remember his name. He used to come down to Daytona every year to sort of help Ken. But I remember because we used to the Open, we did it all live, so you can't screw up. And one year we were walking up to the roof of the grandstand, and she said, "What are you going to say?" And I said, "Well, I think it's very warm today. This is the warmest day we've had all week. All the practice they've done and qualifying and everything. The temperature's been like 20 degrees cooler than today. So I think the heat will affect the track a lot, with the where they go on the track, and it could affect the cars. It affects the air, because the air is thicker." So I said, I think I'll just say that. Ken said, "Welcome to the whatever running, the 25th running of the Daytona 500, the Great American Race," which he coined, that Great American Race, which still sticks today. Well, the Great American Race, another tremendous race in store. And of course, today is hot and humid, and it hasn't been hot and humid all week. And, and I'm standing there thinking, and sort of turns to me and says, "What do you think?" And I sort of basically said, "Yeah." That was one of my more embarrassing moments. It just took the words right out of my mouth. So, but generally speaking, he was really great to work with. Really great. And of course, poor old Ken's not very well now. He got COVID, and it's laid him pretty low. I think he's in a wheelchair.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, I hate to hear that.
He got it in like about July or in the middle. He's been out of action for some time, but and he sold the racetrack, Thunder Road, so good guy.
So at the time of doing the 1979 Daytona 500, did you know, did you think at that moment, like, it would have as much impact as it does today?
No, I had never gave it a thought, really. They put a lot of effort into the production. I know Brock Yates was in the pits as well as Larry Newberg. That's right. Brock Yates was there. And of course, Brock was a great writer. And he had gone off with a production team, and they had done a ton of B-roll. They'd gone to see Junior Johnson's farm. They'd gone to see half the drivers. They had visited them wherever they lived. And they had done, like a 5-minute interview with them. And of course, none of that stuff got used. None of it got used, because everybody was so gripped by the race that there was no time to get. But I don't think any of us ever thought at that time what an incredible success it would have been, and the result of what it did to NASCAR. I mean, absolutely changed it just like that overnight. And I mean, suddenly it was up for grabs, and everybody wanted to do NASCAR, and everybody wanted to pay big bucks. I don't know what the rights fee were for that race, but I bet it wasn't that much. I mean, it would have been, you know, the France have never been backward at coming forward for money. So I'm sure it would have been pretty good, but they could never, in those days, they would never have dreamt that like 30 years later, they'd be getting like, you know, 500,000 a race from the TV. So, yeah, it was, yeah. Yeah.
They should be sending you royalty checks for doing that as well.
Well, I had suggested that, but nobody. What you say? I can't hear you. Can you speak up? Yeah, good idea. Thank you very much. I'll do that. I'll remember that, Aaron.
When you did the Formula One broadcasting, I think in the 2000s, you guys did it from the studio in Charlotte, right? You didn't actually go to the races, or maybe you...
Well, we the first few years with ESPN back in the 80s and early 90s, we used to go to every race. Bob and I went to every race, or you know, first of all, Chris Economaki and I, and it was a lot of travel. I mean, now then, yeah, when we were doing it, they didn't have like 20 races like they do now. They had about 15. But yeah, we went to them all. We go to Japan and Australia and Brazil, Mexico, obviously all the European races. The big, really difficult ones were Japan, Australia, you know, that's a long way. How those guys do it now, even though I know they're all a lot younger than I am now, but I mean, even so, cheap as creepers, the way they flit around the world, it just makes your hair stand on end. And then, of course, they drive a race car. But we went to all the races till I left them in 92. And then once we started doing it from Speed Vision, we never went to race. We went to the US races, and we went to Canada. We didn't go anywhere else. Yeah, when I worked for NBC, it was the same deal. We'd do the US Grand Prix from Austin, and we'd go to Canada. Oh, we go to Monte Carlo, of course. Yeah, we went to Monte Carlo. When I was with ESPN, unfortunately, ABC had Monte Carlo. So I never went to Monte Carlo. Bob and I never went to Monte Carlo. But then when I started working for NBC, we did go to Monte Carlo now, which is a nice weekend. Traffic nightmare. But,
was it harder to do the broadcasting like remote than it was to actually be there? Because I guess, I mean, if you're there, like especially on like a road course, I mean, you're probably looking at TV most of the time anyway, right?
Exactly. You know, you do actually speak only off the monitor. You never look out the window.
Makes sense.
Because you can't talk about what you're looking at out the window, because you've got to talk about what the people at home are watching on the screen. So you have to watch the monitor. The big advantage with going is that you meet a lot of people. You know, you meet the drivers, you meet the mechanics, you meet the team managers, you meet the tire people. So you get a slightly better feel of the event. And of course, you know, it does make you feel for the event. Now, the pit guys like Will Buxton, of course, he went to them all, obviously. He has to go. But it really, and of course, Formula One is so difficult to meet people. I mean, if you go to Monte Carlo, you don't just run into Sebastian Vettel wandering around. He doesn't wander around. I mean, he's in his motorhome all the time. He's in the you know, they have these amazing, Formula One have these absolutely ridiculously expensive hospitality suites, which are big. I mean, they're as big as his house. And they serve thousands of meals a weekend to press and sponsors and people like that. And then they also have a sort of private wing where the drivers go. I mean, you hardly ever see the drivers even in their own environment. So if you want to actually talk to a driver, you have to make an appointment. And of course, the PR, the woman that will be a PR, most of them are women PR, and most of them are about 20. And they just have no idea. Have no idea about life, you know. They say, "Oh well, you can see Mr. Prost on tomorrow afternoon at 5 o'clock or whatever." You say, "I want to see him now." So it doesn't make as much difference as it should do, you know, because as I say, you don't just run into them wandering around. You say, "Hi, how you know, what's it like out there?" It just doesn't happen. You run into all the other press guys. But that only gives you, you know, the one side of the story. You want the real scoop. So it doesn't make that much difference if you are in the studio, really. I mean, Will Muxer used to talk to them all and ferret stuff out, and he was very good. Peter Windsor was good too, because Peter Windsor, you know, and he worked with us at Speed Vision. I mean, Peter Windsor's been around Formula One for 45 years on site. I mean, you know, every race. So he knew everybody and everybody knew him. So he would get interviews and get to see people. So it kind of didn't make a lot of difference whether you're at the studio or not, because the picture's the same. I mean, the picture's exactly the same. You just don't see anything else. No good looking out the window when you. I mean, I'm in the Indianapolis. The booth was up on the roof, so you could see everywhere. There's no good looking out the window at everything that's going on, because you got to be watching the monitor.
You know, you've seen this sport. I mean, from its most dangerous days till today, and the safety part of it is great. The money part of it is great. But do you think that auto racing is big league auto racing do you feel that it's lost touch sort of where it's just lost touch with its fans? I mean, the fans still come. Yes, it's still popular. F1 is extremely popular right now, but in IndyCar is not quite as bad, but they're not as popular these days. NASCAR, they're not quite as popular as they were, but it's the interactions just between the fans and the drivers, and that just the connections seem lost. Am I right on that, or am I just?
I think you are right. I mean, yeah, when I first used to go to Formula One races, I was driving like a Formula Ford in another race. But you know, you go to somewhere like Silverstone, and you'd see Dan Gurney and Jimmy Clark and Jackie Stewart all wandering around, and you'd stop and talk to them, and they would talk to people in the paddock, fans. So fans had a much more of a feel that they know the guy. Now the TV, of course, has helped that enormously, because in those days nothing was on the telly unless somebody got hurt. Then they'd have a picture of the fiery crash on the news, and that would sort of about be it. But I do think that racing, I think people are a little bit put off by the safety. They shouldn't be, but I think, you know, from the driver's point of view, it's great. From the fans' point of view, I think it misses a little bit of that. I mean, even Sterling Moss used to say, right up till nearly when he died, he'd say, well, Percy said, I used to love going to a hairpin with a tree right on the apex, because he said, I knew I had to miss it. But the cars are so flimsy and everything. But of course, IndyCar, I mean, got shot right in the foot by Tony Holman. I mean, it was a disgrace what they did to the IRL, and the Champ car was going so well, so strong. And it took them a long time to get back from that. Now, I'm not sure that having spec cars, which is what it is. I mean, in Dallara, everybody's got the same car, and you got two engines. and you can't do much to the engines either. I mean, in fact, you can't do anything. I mean, the engine comes all sealed. You put it in, you race it, you take it out, or you keep it in for another race or another practice or whatever. I think that takes away from the racing a little bit. And the other thing is this remoteness of the drivers. You know, you can never actually interact with the drivers very much. And I was only saying the other day, for instance, even in spite of no TV in the old days, people like Mario Foyt, Jimmy Clark, Sterling Moss became household names just in the newspaper and radio broadcasts and stuff like that. Because every American knows Mario and everybody knows Foyt. But I mean, how many people, if you said, what about Scott Dixon then? They'd say, who's Scott Dixon? What's he do? You'd say, well, he's won 6 national championships and he's won the Indy 500 and, you know, and no one's ever heard of him. I mean, how many people in America have heard of Simon Pagenaud? And these are the top guys. Now, I think that IndyCar is definitely coming back. It's become very competitive. And, you know, you get like 9 winners in a year, 8 or 9 winners, separate, different. But the funny thing about that sort of equality is that it's difficult to become a star. I mean, it's like golf. Golf now, I mean, there was a time when it was all Arnold Palmer and what's his name? You know, Jack Nicklaus.
Jack Nicklaus, yeah.
All Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer. Then you got the South African guy was there, and the crocodile, you know, from Dundee was there. But it was really all Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer for years. Now, I mean, they have these times. A different guy wins every week, and you can't keep up with it. You know, you say, well, what happened to Jordan Spieth? He was world number 1 only a few weeks back. Well, that was 5 years ago, and he's only won 1 tournament since. You said, what? And I mean, he was like 21, and when he was going to be the new god of golf, did well. And I'm wondering if some of that is a bit of a lack of, not enthusiasm, but a lack of drive because they make so much money. Suddenly Jordan Spieth, when he's 23 or 4, is worth about $50 million and makes another 20 million a year from sponsorship and appearance fee. I mean, these golfers go off on these trips. You know, they go and play a one-off deal in Japan and they get $1 million to go. And I don't know whether that takes the edge off their performance and they just don't try as hard, or it's
such a weird thing. Like, you know, for years there, you know, and I know Europe had these as well, but there was kind of like these racing Bibles you'd get every week or every month.
Yes, right.
And you would read these stories in
Also
like Speed Sport, Auto Week, Speed Sport, all that. And I, you know, as a kid, even I would know about drivers I'd never seen race before because I'd read all the results. And now it seems like you can focus solely in to what you're into, that you miss the entirety of the sport and seeing all these different people come along. And it's a weird thing where we have more access today in many ways as far as the knowledge of the people, but it's harder to point these people out. You know, it's this weird juxtaposition.
It is. And you said in your opening statement there that, you know, the racing and the money's good. Well, the money, of course, is extraordinary, but just for a handful. Half the others spend that much money to be there. Whereas, you know, you got your golf tournament, you got the Augusta, match in April. You know, they're all getting paid. There's nobody there that's paying as much as the winner's going to get. And it's a funny thing, you know, when you're in a professional sport, you kind of expect, and you know, my grandson struggled for years, and he had the advantage of having my name, but which helped a little bit to start with. But ultimately, it came down to the nitty gritty. Well, have you got $100,000 to do like 5 races or 6 races in some poxy little car? And he finally hit the wall when somebody wanted $40,000 to drive in a Continental Challenge race, which is a 2-hour race with 2 drivers, and he was going to have to cough up 40 grand to do his hour. And if the other guy crashed it on Thursday, he wouldn't get in it at all. And even Andrew realized that was. And one of his immediate sparring partners, right from when they were little kids in go-karts, was Spencer Piggott. And Spencer Piggott he's very good. Is he exceptional? No. But he's very good. I mean, he won the Indy Lights. He won a lot of championships, including the Indy Lights. Gets into IndyCar, but he's still paying like a couple of $100,000 a race. Then he eventually gets a drive offered by Carpenter, and they pay him $300,000 a year. And his dad and my son, Greg, are big mates. Barry Piggott and Guy, Greg, are very good friends. And Barry was at our house at Elkhart Lake while they were up there for Road America IndyCar race. And he said, well, basically, it's cost us $5 million to get Spencer into a position where he's being paid $300,000 a year. And that lasted 1 year. And he didn't have a great year, but then driving for Ed Carpenter, you know, I mean, I'm not sure what Ed Carpenter's preparation is like. I can't imagine it's like a Ganassi or a Penske. And he had a bit of a lackluster year. And of course, Rhinus VK comes along with tons of Dutch money, and he's out. And now I think he's driving some sports cars, but I mean, it's just, and he might be making a bit of money driving sports cars, but Christ, they spent $5 million to get. Now, it wasn't his dad. I mean, his dad was very good at getting money out of people. But that was one of the things that put my grandson off in the end. He said, I'm absolutely just cheesed right off with writing all these begging letters to people. You know, I'm Andrew Hobbs, and I've done this and I've done that, and I won this and I won that. And, you know, but I need, you know, you can hardly dare say I need $100,000. And of course, $100,000 these days won't even buy your bloody tires. So, so it's racing is one of those where, I mean, there's a lot of pain that, you know, everybody thought the NASCAR came up off the short tracks. They went through ARCA, they went through, the next step up. Then you go into, and you made money all the way along. You didn't cost you. It didn't cost. Now, I mean, there's tons of paying NASCAR drivers, and I don't know. So,
well, the economics are upside down.
The economics are very, and then you know you got Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton between them are making $100 million a year.
Yeah, and that's just their salary. I'm sure, like they have endorsements and stuff.
And they have their own endorsements. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And of course, you know, they get the racing cars at the end of the season. They get the racing car. They give them the racing car. They give them a road car. You know, I say a road car. I mean, like an AMG Mercedes, which sells for $280,000. I don't mean a Ford Focus. And you know, yeah. So the economics are pretty screwed up in racing, right through IndyCar, Formula One. I mean, you know, you get Lance Stroll. His dad paid $30 million for him to drive for Williams. Now his dad is extraordinarily wealthy, and of course, has bought not only bought the Aston Martin racing team, he's bought the whole company now. He's the main shareholder. So I guess Lance Stroll is not going to lose his drive. but he's actually quite good. I mean, he's not bad at all. But it makes you wonder when one guy's getting 30 million a year, 25 million a year to drive, and somebody else is paying 30 million to be in the same race. You don't see that. You don't see that in tennis or golf or any sport.
And back when you raced, I mean, that really wasn't the thing either, right?
No. Rich kids have always been right in there, and I was lucky. My dad had invented an automatic transmission, which was very advanced for the day. It had 4 separate speeds. It was hydraulically operated, but it had a friction clutch, so it didn't use much horsepower. And I raced my mum's Morris Oxford, which was already 10 years old. In a club race today, you'd be laughed out. They wouldn't let you in. They wouldn't let you through the gate. I raced that for a year. Then I raced Dad's Jag, his XK140, but I didn't know dick about racing, so I tried to race the thing on Michelin X tires. Well, of course, I rolled it the first race. And then I went on and we had a few wins in that. And then luckily Dad had sold some of the stock in his company. It was bought by Westinghouse Brake and Signal, so he had a bit of cash. And the Westinghouse, and he decided, well, maybe it's not a bad idea. This racing might help spread the word about the gearbox. So they bought me a Lotus Elite, which at the time was about £2,000. But when I first started racing, I mean, I took Mum's car. I just had road tire. I didn't have any racing tire, anything like that. I mean, I had to you had to get a racing license, and you had to join a club, and you had to join the RAC, which is like ACUS over here, or like SCCA or whatever. And the total, and then they had to pay an entry fee for the race. Well, the entry fee for the race was about £2.50. And the license was about another £3 or £5. And the whole thing cost me like about £15, which was just a hair more than I made in a week. I was getting paid £10 a week as an apprentice at Jaguar. And I was getting £10 a week. By then, when I started, I was getting £2, £2.50. So it cost me nothing, relatively speaking. When Andrew started go-karting when he was 8, I mean, the entry fee for a weekend out at Dousman, go-kart track west of Milwaukee, I mean, it was about $200 for the entry fee. And then the tires were like $50 each, and I mean, crikey, give us a break, So when I was very lucky. I mean, let's put it this way: I would not be racing if I had to do what I did. If I had to do today what I did then, obviously I wouldn't be racing. I would have never been a racing driver. It just wouldn't have happened. Wouldn't have happened because I mean, those helmets on the back shelf behind you there, Aaron. I mean, I got the SCCA magazine yesterday. I get it every month, and there's a Schubert helmet advertising there. $2,000.
Yeah, these are just half scale. These are just small helmets, so it's just a half scale.
Oh, I see. Yeah, right. Yeah.
But yeah, no, helmets are expensive.
They sure are.
You see, like Jimmy Johnson, I don't know if you ever see his posts on social media. Like that dude did a helmet swap, seemed like about every single day last year. I mean, he had to have at least 20-something helmets.
Yeah, $2,000 each.
With the paint, probably a lot more than that. I mean, you're probably talking what, $3,500, $4,000 maybe?
Yeah, per helmet.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So
I read
things have changed a lot because and a lot of people that started when I started were like I was, I mean, our friend Richard Atwood, he started when I did. Now his dad did buy him a racing car. He bought him a Formula Junior, a Cooper Ford. But I mean, I think that probably only cost maybe £3,000 or £4,000, if that. but it was a lot more than I could have done. But I mean, he was a wealthy family, but so there's always been a bit of it. But nowadays it's gone completely berserk. I mean, like Andrew, when he's go-karting, his dad, they had like a van and a trailer, and and then kids would come with a full-scale IndyCar transporter with about 2 carts in there, 3 or 4 engines, God knows how many tires, and an ex-IndyCar mechanic to look after it for him. I mean, Greg's looking after Andrew's car, and I mean, it's just. I mean, these guys now spend $200,000 or $300,000 a year on go-karting. Then you get into the cars.
Yeah, I read a thing today where someone asked Kyle Busch that since now Kurt is driving Toyotas, would he have him do a couple truck races? And he said only if he brings money. And I mean, that tells you all you need to know about how expensive it is. I know someone who was going to run just the ARCA series. The last 2 years, they were trying to put together a deal for the ARCA series, and it was going to be $1 million a year minimum to do it. And it's just you get nothing back for it.
No.
That you pay $1 million, you get to run some races, and then the following year they say, "Hey, can you come up with another $1 million?"
Yeah.
I mean, that's. It's upside down. It's completely upside down.
It's not right. And like when Andrew is looking for money, when he was looking for money to do like Formula Mazda, you say to some guy, it's going to cost $750,000 to do like 6 races. Well, we're going to get we might get 3 of the races, might be a week or 2 weeks delayed TV on some obscure channel. I mean, not exactly a great. Is anybody going to be there? Well, there'll be a lot there when we race at support race for, if we get into the support race on Thursday afternoon, there won't be anybody there at all. So, yeah, it's, but I mean, $1 million for an ARCA.
Right.
I mean, an ARCA car in the old days would cost you about $300 to buy it.
True.
Yeah.
Well, David, I know you got to go. But we really appreciate you taking the time always to talk to us, and it's always an honor.
I enjoy it.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Are you racing much? Do you race at all, Aaron?
Nope. Never raced.
Sell those helmets, and you get enough money to race.
Well, they're just a mini helmets. I don't think they're worth that much.
No, I don't know. Well, anyway, thanks for asking me. So. Anytime you want to do that, just give us a call. Send us an email or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely will. Well, I hope you enjoy the nice weather in Florida. When do you go back to Wisconsin?
We'll probably go back in May. In May, we're going to go out to Bozeman, Montana, because our other grandson graduates from Bozeman State. So our son, his father, wants us to drive out because he said, you go past Monument Valley and you see the presidents and all that. And he said, it's a pretty nice drive out there. It's a bit long, but so we'll probably do that in May. And then we'll probably go back to Elkhart Lake. No point going to Wisconsin before June. No point at all.
Get there just in time for mosquito season.
Exactly, yeah.
When was the last time you came for the 500? It's been a while, hasn't it?
No, I did I came to 500 with Honda in the 2019.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
And we were guests of Honda because we got a Honda dealership. So
right.
We got and we stayed at the Marriott. It's the way to watch the race because you got a booth. You got a suite over the line. Actually, on that front straight on the inside is not the best place to watch the race because you can't see them coming or going. You've got to watch the monitor really. You really need to be up in like turn 1 or something where you can see them for a lot longer. But so that's when I last went. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. All right.
Hey, thank you so much, David. We always appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Scott. Aaron, nice to talk to you both.
Yep. We'll talk again soon. Appreciate
again,
it.
man. Okay.
All
Thanks a lot.